I really want to invite in Peter, who is just such an incredible being. He and I have been talking about like how this virus works, how it works in the body. I was doing some research on Chinese medicine. I sent it to him. He did even deeper research and sent it back to me. And I really want to share his insights, because he has such an incredible understanding of how the microcosm and the macrocosm work. When we think about what happened to the Amazon last year and the lungs of our planet and the Siberian rainforests and the bushes in Australia, we realize that we've had we've destroyed the lungs of our planet, and now we're getting a situation going on with our lungs. So as we start to think about how we can affect our microcosm, as we start to take care of the little part of nature that we've been given, then that will be reflected in the whole.
Thanks so much for inviting me, and hi to everyone. If you want to ask me any questions as I'm talking, please do interrupt. The main book that I work from is called the Huangdi Neijing, and it's the oldest text of Chinese medicine. There's some dispute about when it was written, and that's kind of a whole other topic, but just to be short and simple, it really tries to understand the expression of a human being as something that's coming into being in relationship to the circulation patterns around us. And those circulation patterns around us are ecological. They are in front of us in our environment, but actually in this old book, they talk about how it extends all the way out into the cosmos. Our yearly cycles move in relationship to a pattern of 60 basically, and I won't get much into that. They actually, a long time ago, they tried to observe the different vibrational currents as dictated by stars in relationship to the movements on the planet and the seasons and how those two intermingle. And all of this work and this translation work and this understanding of these philosophies is by a man named Dr. Edward Neal, and he really has created the first incredible, basically, translation of this original book based off these patterns of motion, basically. And why that is so important is because what that original book does is asks you to look behind what's actually occurring and then look deeper into patterns of nature and how things emerge into being based on vibrational patterns. And they come in epochs, they come in seasons, they come in the day, every time the sun raises, every time the moon raises. It's all these things that are competing and undulating basically in sort of a rhythmic like motion is the language of that old book. And that we're part of that rhythmic motion. Epidemic diseases are very interesting because inside this old book, they talk about different seasonal illnesses that occur along these 60-year cycles that are interlocking with seasons, which I won't really get into either. But and actually, interestingly enough, in this old book, talks about how in wintertime, epidemic diseases of this year, of this specific season, will be actually a big issue. The interesting parts about everything that's happening is that in this book in general, it talks about how you are arising into being among these multitudinous reactions. And they say basically that it affects the circulation of your body, and not as we traditionally see now as like a meridian, lines of energy on top, but actually all of the fluids of your body, your bones, your muscles, your tissue, everything. And that is actually like in this, like I said, this undulating sort of moving, permeable relationship to everything that's on the planet going on all the time. And you're basically being breathed by nature or the cosmos. That's the thing that's occurring. You're being breathed as you're breathing in. The important part about disease is that disease arises in someone's physiology, but really more ecology when the ecology is disturbed. Epidemic diseases are interesting because they talk about this in this old book too, where that somehow the seasonal forces are so intense that it overwhelms most people's circulatory systems. And so this is very interesting because the coronavirus itself creates disease in the body. What we're seeing is a lot of cold issues in the body. So in the very beginning, there's this cough and fever, but then it seems like the tissues in the lungs start to develop this, what they call this dampness or this phlegm. And it's basically the reaction of the virus to your own tissues and your cells, and then the exudate that happens in reaction to that. And then it becomes SARS-CoV-2 induced pneumonia, basically. And that takes place over about 6 or 7 days after you've been infected. And it's interesting because it's a little bit different of an expression than the first SARS, even though they're part of the same family of viruses. The original book that I'm talking about talked about how during this exact time, this seasonal time, the epidemic diseases would take the form of cold, basically. And that is kind of what we've determined in terms of this expression of this illness, which is just, it's interesting. The wisdom of that original book is to look behind the thing that's occurring now, and then instead try to feel beyond and into the patterns that are causing the thing to emerge into being at a certain time. So a lot of the things that we talk about, are like, we look at events as gross, like this happened. So, this official gets elected and that's the bad thing that's occurring. It's more that like things, according to this old book, are arising in waves that eventually come into being that we see and then we name like on their surface. But actually there's this huge underlying machination of the cosmic vibrations of the universe, the vibrations of the planet that intermingle and mixing, and then they co-arise and create things that we identify as things and places and events.
We've been speaking a lot about like the cold and the way that the cold affects the body, about drinking warm drinks and the warm spices, but then also lots of people at the moment are all like, oh, I'm going to do Wim Hof because it's like, I'm going to do my cold showers in the morning, and I'm going to go swimming in a cold pool, and I'm going to do my ice bath because that really like pumps up my immune system and stimulates my nervous system. How do you feel about that presently?
Cold, basically, the reason why they were so obsessed with cold in this old book is because cold, of all the pathogens, was the one that when you were exposed to it in the environment, and if you ever had extreme exposure to cold, this is a very visceral feeling. If a lot of us maybe don't, or if you've ever had mild frostbite or you've been stuck out too long in the cold, you know exactly what this is. But it's like it comes into your body and it gets in there and it's like you can't get warm, like in your actual tissue. And then you take this super hot bath and it kind of makes things better, but not really. And it's like something's there. And so, I know there's a lot of research on Wim Hof and, cryosaunas and things like that. Our view of that is that what's happening is when you are faced with cold, your body does mount a response. And that's true in Western inflammatory and also immune response. So you actually do have an immune response to cold. You can actually develop changes in your tissue in relationship to the cold. And so what happens is your body mounts a response because you get cold. So everything changes, your blood circulation changes. The issue is that you're not moving so well, where your circulation isn't so good. The cold seems to kind of come in and stick, basically, actually in your tissue. And then the reason why that's a problem is because it's in there and then your circulation has to contend with that. And so right now, basically, it's not the best idea because it's just the environment itself is filled with cold. And then you're putting cold on. It's not really, it's not a good mix. The better thing would actually be really, really hot baths. And then to make sure that your bathroom is warm and that you get out and you totally dry off and you get a robe and you walk out into your room and you're not wet at all. Because there's this change, obviously, in temperature. Usually people's houses are really cold and things like that. And again, it seems like, wow, it's just cold or whatever, but it actually really does come into your tissue and you actually kind of tighten up and you start to constrict. It seems like right now, it's probably better to do those hot baths. So that's my thoughts on that right now.
I want to ask you what you feel about, because I'm not encouraging people to do the juices or cold water. I'm trying to keep people's digestive systems as warm as possible. So I would love to hear from you what you think about the things that we could be drinking.
I agree with the idea about warming drinks and foods. Your digestive tract is filled with actually the linings are filled with blood, basically, as your whole body. And your blood vessels have a relationship to warmth and cold, really simply. And when you drink cold things, especially, and this is related to the spectrum of like really cold ice water and things like that, it goes in and constricts those vessels, and blood and the movement of blood affects all secretions too, basically. So your stomach is like a blood net, and it actually has all these secretions of bacteria that are inside of the inner lining. So you don't want to actually hold things to cause constrictions and changes of that, especially around eating and things like that. So I think it's a great idea. Anyway, ginger is great, chai is great, turmeric is great, really just all warming foods, miso right now. And you can add that to broths, you know, and
can you have a mushroom drink in the morning? Yeah, I mean, I think mushrooms are great. How do you feel about mushrooms, Peter?
Oh, they're great. Mushrooms have this mycelium network. We think that they create the connections between roots and forest systems. We think, we're not sure, but so we think. And they are just make huge nets that wrap around entire ecosystems. So it seems like that they really help what we call the fat tissue, or the earth tissue, when you take them, which is basically all the fat that's between your connective tissue. And fat is really interesting. It's a communicating organ. Your adipose tissue is hormonal, so your fat tissue creates hormonal changes. It's a reservoir for exposure to chemicals, actually. This is all in documented research too. And so we think right now, we don't know, but that mushrooms really help that earth, or that center tissue. And so, yeah, mushrooms are just excellent. Let's see. So general health and immunity, herbs right now, there's a lot of herbs that are very helpful for that. But so short-term uses of licorice are really good right now, because they create a difference in how your cells react to viruses, just to be simple. And so licorice is really good. Astragalus is really good because it's immune modulating. The mushrooms are really good. Let's see, ginger, cinnamon is really good as well. Cinnamon also creates a disruption how the virus connects. And there's a lot of nourishing herbs that help too. Oh, zinc is really good too. And vitamin C, of course. And what you want to do is really supplement your digestion with warming foods, warming teas. This is all just like grandma's advice, but this is really true about the reason why grandma's advice is so helpful is because it actually causes you to sync yourself with seasonal rhythms. That is the old way of existing, and it is very helpful. So getting to bed at a reasonable time. There is an internal limiter that everyone basically has when they know that they're walking too far out on a ledge with their health. It's in us from birth, and maybe it kind of gets changed, and you lose a connection with that. Just as you said, this is an amazing time when you may not have as much of that, and you really just go back to that and say, what's going on with me right now? I'm not feeling so well. I'm going to take it easy, those things. We have a question about these 3 herbs, and I know you probably want to talk about this too, but that's a really interesting question. She asked, do you have top 3 herbs that you'd plan to grow in your garden? Well, I'm learning a lot about herbs. I learned a lot about it in Chinese medicine school, and but I'm learning more personally because my wife's in a different herbal school, and that's a very personal exploration. So plants, they are living beings off the earth. They're like our family, basically, and they will talk to you about which ones that they want you to have, basically. But if you're asking top 3 herbs, a great one is, which, you know, Joe can obviously talk a lot about, is white sage, because white sage is endangered. So you have to be careful with that in the wild. And that's a great herb to plant in your garden, because it's a way to restore your relationship to the land. And it's a way to really cultivate a really important herb in the area. Another one is nettles. Nettles is a really remarkable herb. Burdock is incredible, although it takes a lot of effort and also to get actually the roots. Burdock's incredible. Dandelion is really easy to grow, is amazing. If you ever look for like what's called nourishing herbs, they're like the 5 important herbs, and they're very mild, but they are cumulative in effect. And those are very potent and powerful. It can really change your health. Burdock can change your intestinal health if you take it repeatedly in small doses very well. So, and nettles is incredible, a nutritive tonic. There are some Chinese herbs that we use too, but those are the ones I would say locally. I don't know. Joe, what do you think?
As you well know, I have a tea garden, and the plants do talk to me. I walk down there and I reach for the ones, like I'll find myself going for one herb, and all of a sudden for like weeks and weeks I'll be drinking this one herb, and it'll be like my favorite tea. And then one morning I'll wake up and I'll drink it, and I'll be like, that doesn't taste nice anymore. My body doesn't want it, and I'll go down, I'll find myself drawn to something else. Me personally, the ones that I love are lemon balm, lemon verbena, because they're just so calming to the nervous system. They really They really bring us down, and I find them really refreshing, and they're beautiful if you can make them hot, or if you make a big batch, you can put it in the refrigerator in the summer. Those are two of my favorite herbs to have. I also have lemongrass because I think it's really good for cleansing. And then, as you well know, I have a lot of white sage, artemisias, and lavender. So yeah, I think having herbs in your garden is incredibly important.
Yeah. Somebody asked also too about apple cider vinegar affecting gut health.
Well, first of all, you should brew your own. And if you need a SCOBY and you're in LA, let me know, because I have an abundance of them.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm sure Peter is enjoying the one that I bestowed to him.
Yeah, there's something amazing about like generative gifts like that. I personally think apple cider vinegar is great. There may be countering opinions on that. It definitely affects your insulin response if you want to go the Western route from it. It's really good if you're about to eat something sweet to take a little bit, and it will actually change how your stomach responds to sugars in a way. I guess some people could find it maybe irritating to the gut, but ultimately I think it's good. I'm
just going to tell you a little bit about my morning routine, so that people can sort of just have a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing, especially now at the moment. I have apple cider vinegar, apple juice, and lemon juice. So it's a third of each, and I make a big jar of it, and I just pour a little bit into the bottom of my mug, and not boiling hot water, but warm water, like towards the hotter. And I put that in, and that's my first drink in the morning. So it's the first thing in my mouth. It helps to, really like populate my gut, clean everything out, alkalizes. And then after that, I take a activated charcoal or a zeolite or a bentonite. And that's because overnight, our body will have produced a lot of like toxins, and we'll have toxins sitting in our gut. And so I'm then taking the zeolite or the activated charcoal to like bind everything. So everything, like I'm basically alkalizing, I'm putting something in my gut that's going to like attract all the toxins so that they can get bound. And then I'm taking something when I come back to flush everything out the system and move everything out and evacuate. And then I start my, whether it be my oats or my broth or whatever I'm doing for that day. There's two ways that you can eat, and a lot of us emotionally eat. And when you're emotionally eating, generally it's something that comes up immediately, and it can only be quenched by certain foods. Whereas true hunger is something that builds. It's something that comes gradually. And if you have a nice soup or something like that, and you're like, what, I don't want the leek and potato soup. I want the chocolate. Well, then it's probably not that you're hungry. It's probably that you are craving something. So I just want to kind of like get you to read into something and take responsibility for yourself and say, am I doing this because I'm trying to distract, or am I doing this because my body really needs it? There's a huge difference between the way that those two things work, and only you have the answer to that.
I wanted to say an interesting thing about urges too. I think there's a interesting point of view that this work can talk about, which is foods, experiences. They're pushing upon different tissue systems. Basically, in this old book, your organs were actually not organs, but roots of vibrational energy, and that became condensed into tissue. And those actually contained emotional states too. And your whole body basically contains memories and things like that. And so it seems like in the impulse portion of human experience, or I guess addiction or something like that, what we find too is that it's a impulse to move a certain system, to try to self-move, self-medicate. For instance, if you have issues in your liver system, for instance, just to take an easy one, and that organ is actually the root of a larger tissue system. So in this old book, and when you drink alcohol, for instance, it moves that a little bit. The issue is, of course, it also damages it a little bit. So it's like when you are having a need for something, sometimes it can be because a certain system is actually not moving or breathing well. And when I mean breathing, I don't mean just like a small internal breath. I mean the ebb and flow, like tidal rhythms that is going on in your connective tissue and your organs, that's not moving well, literally physically, not in like an ideological way. Literally, that's not moving very well. And so you take the certain things like sweets, for instance, change the digestive tract a lot. So sometimes when you have issues there, you want to eat the sweets and you want to change. So we look at it in terms of insulin and glucose response. But really, it's in the soul book, it's like you take it to sort of like press upon it to change it. The issue is that often when it's stuck, that only is a momentary thing, and often encumbers that system that you're trying to work on.
If you have any questions or you need any more support, please do reach out. I will be available at alive@creativecleansing.com. I love you all. Thank you so much. Good night.